fair, most Taylor Jenkins Reid's books would be a good pick for the spring month. I think with this one it was just really charming and whimsical. I always find with spring, for some reason I always gravitate a bit more towards either literary fiction or contemporary romance. Hi lovelies, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name's Maria, and today's video is kind of going to be a spring reading overview because I have some spring reading recommendations, I have my TBR, and then I also want to go through some of the new releases that are coming out in spring that I'm interested in picking up as well. So a bit of a mix of a few things, but basically, as I say, it's just going to be kind of a spring reading overview of books I think you should be picking up and books that I want to pick up as well. I always find with spring, for some reason I always gravitate a bit more towards either literary fiction or contemporary romance. So I still obviously read fantasy and romantasy, that is always going to be my main genre, but for some reason those are the months that I kind of gravitate more towards that literary fiction side of things, or any classics or anything like that that I've had my eye on. So you'll probably see that reflected in some of the books that I'm interested in. But first list of books I'm going to go through are my reading recommendations for spring, and books that I think fit the kind of season and will give you the optimum vibes when it's spring. So the first one I have is one that everyone will have heard of, and it's Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. Now, this was probably one of the first classics that I ever read. I read it when I was quite young because I loved the BBC adaptation of this one. So I haven't watched the new one, kind of the 2005 or something like that. Whatever one Keira Knightley's in, I haven't watched that one. I love the 1995 BBC kind of episodic version of it, and since I'd watched that, I wanted to read the source material when I was in my teens, and this is a book that I've absolutely loved. I've read it multiple times, and I do think it's quite an approachable kind of classic. It's not too convoluted or anything like that. Within this one, we're following the Bennet family, and particularly the Bennet sisters, at a time when they're all kind of going through their courtship, trying to find husbands, trying to find their way in society. And particularly, we do follow Elizabeth Bennet, who is quite set in her ways, quite headstrong, isn't really that interested in getting a husband, and we follow her as she meets Mr. Darcy, who is the MMC in this one, and he's quite moody, quite distant, kind of the original moody MMC. And we just kind of watch their relationship develop, their dynamic together, and it's just one that I really, really love. And I think this one is great for spring because it's really lighthearted, it's quite witty, there's a lot of dialogue in there, especially from Mrs. Bennet, who's the mother, that will have you giggling and laughing as you're reading this. Obviously, the romance journey between Elizabeth and Mr. Darcy will again keep you entertained. We watch Elizabeth as she kind of overcomes her prejudices of certain people within society, so there's kind of that theme of renewal and transformation. And most of the transformations of the characters in here are pretty positive, so by the end of them, even the characters that you may not have loved at the start, you do end up loving at the end. So I think this is just a great one to read, especially if you've never read a classic before. This is a very approachable one, as I say. You do have the love story in there. It is kind of a social commentary of that time of when it was written, but it's not too convoluted in terms of the writing style or anything. So definitely recommend this for a spring read, especially if you're a lover of romance or anything like that, because more than likely you will have read quite a few books that have been inspired by this one. Next up, I would say that Madeline Miller's Circe is definitely a good one to read in spring. It's kind of based on Greek mythology, but it's a character within mythology that's kind of been forgotten. And within this story, she is definitely ostracized, even within her family. She's seen as different. She has, magical powers and things like that. So again, a lot of this book is a lot to do with kind of self-discovery and a Greek retelling, but just from a different perspective. We have some really beautiful writing within this one as well. So I would say that the writing is quite flowery and poetic within this. So I know that's not everyone's cup of tea, so just be mindful of that if you're going into this one. And I think the main theme of this is just kind of seeing a female protagonist who has been beaten down in the past, kind of being empowered and taking over her own destiny and overcoming challenges. So I think it's a really inspiring read, and again, I just think it would really fit the spring season perfectly because of those themes. Next up is The House in the Cerulean Sea by TJ Klune, and this one I don't have a physical copy of it, but I really, really love this one. I actually read it via audiobook, and I highly recommend the audiobook. The narrator is really good at giving all of the characters a good personality and really bringing out their personality, I would say, in the story. Within the story, we follow Linus, who at the start of the book is given the job to oversee this orphanage by what is called upper management. So this is basically the company he works for. So he has to go off to this orphanage to kind of make sure that things are being taken care of there as they should be. Now with this orphanage, we do have kind of a collection of children who basically are a little bit different. They may have slightly different powers, or they may be slightly different beings. We've got a gnome in there. We've got basically like a blob of some sort that's some sort of creature, and we've got a child called Damien who we're guessing is the son of some demon or the devil or something like that. And this one's just a really heartwarming story. It's quite whimsical. It definitely has that feel-good factor. It's got really charming characters characters with a focus on kind of acceptance and love, and it's a great choice for kind of a really light and positive read in the spring season. There's kind of a gentle subplot of romance in there as well, which again just added to kind of that heartwarming story, and I just really loved it. As I say, definitely recommend checking out the audiobook for that one as well, because it really brought the characters to life for me. So next up is The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo by Taylor Jenkins Reid, and this one is again a bit of a story about found family, and while there are some heartwarming moments within this one, I definitely think this one's a little bit more hard-hitting, and you might just want to check some trigger warnings for this one before going into it. But in this one we're following basically Evelyn Hugo, who is an old Hollywood icon, and she's coming to the end of her life and decides that she wants to share her story with the media, and she ends up picking this kind of unknown journalist to write her autobiography, and no one is more surprised than that journalist when she is picked to write her story. And we're just kind of following that journey along. We have snippets of Evelyn telling her story to the journalist, and we're just following her life, going through some of her hardships, and maybe just getting behind that Hollywood guise and understanding that glitz and glamour isn't always as it seems. This one's really easy to get into. I think it's pretty fast paced, and it's got a very engaging plot as well, so it's always kind of keeping you on your toes. I do think as you're reading through this that you really see that character development from start to finish, and at the start you're not really sure if Evelyn is a likeable character, but by the end I absolutely loved her, so highly recommend this one. Or to be fair, most Taylor Jenkins Reid's books would be a good pick for the spring months, but out of the ones that I've read so far, this is probably my favourite. Next up is one that I read last year, and that's Howl's Moving Castle by Diana Wynne Jones, and this one is, I think this is technically middle grade, so just below YA, so just keep that in mind if you are going to pick this one up. It is directed at a much younger audience, but I still really enjoyed this one. And in the story we're following Sophie, who has basically come to the attention of the Witch of the Waste, who ends up putting a curse on her to make her look like an old woman, and in order to get that curse removed from her, she ends up having to enlist the help of Howl, who is kind of the local sorcerer, and most people are quite afraid of him and would want to stay away from him, but we kind of follow her story as she goes to try and enlist his help, and the story kind of goes from there. I think with this one it was just really charming and whimsical. It has a very light-hearted tone, and there's definitely a concentration on kind of the adventure, a feeling of, you know, new beginnings. There's some really beautiful imagery in here as well, and I just think overall it had some really positive themes and just a much lighter read, and definitely suited to these lighter months, and one that I was actually surprised how much I enjoyed, even though reading it as an adult. I wasn't sure how I was going to enjoy this one because of the age it's targeted at, but definitely don't let that put you off. I think if you do like kind of fantasy stories, you probably will still like this one. It was a very quick and fast read, so perfect if you've got a couple of hours in an afternoon just to pick this one up. And again, I listened to the audiobook for this one and highly recommend it. I think it was really good. And then last up for recommendations is The Fairy Secret Society for I get this wrong every time. The Fairy Secret Society of Irregular Witches by Sangu Mandana, and this one I just absolutely loved. It was very much the epitome of kind of cozy fantasy, low stakes. We're following a witch called Mika Moon, and within this world witches aren't really supposed to congregate together. There's a danger if there's too many witches in one area. They believe that it could cause chaos, so you're not meant to mingle with any other witches. But Mika sees this advertisement which basically is asking for help for 3 young witches who have been orphaned and have been living in this house and need some help trying to control their magic. She ends up answering this advertisement and goes to help with the young girls, and with this one it's just, as I say, very cozy, very low stakes. When she's there she does meet Jamie, who is almost like the caretaker of this house, and there is a little bit of a subplot of romance with them too as well. But I just thought this was full of really lovable characters. You know, the children that are in this are really lovable and quirky and definitely had me giggling. I really liked the subplot of romance in here as well, and you definitely get that found family aspect when you're reading this one, and I just think it's a perfect lighter read for the spring months, as it has an overall very, you know, cheerful tone and is really uplifting, so perfect for this time of year. Okay, so now for a few books that I have on my spring TBR. It's not kind of an exhaustive list. There's quite a few books that I do want to get to over the next few months, but these are the ones that I think are particularly ones that I want to read in spring, because I do think they fit this kind of time of year. Whether because it's a literary fiction, this is just the time of year that I want to read it, or if it's just one that I think will fit this mood. So I do have 2 from the same author. So the first one I have here is Us Against You by Frederick Backman, and this is the second book in the Beartown series. Now this is kind of set in Sweden in quite a snowy town, so this is probably more suitable for a winter read, but I did read Beartown last month and really just want to see where this story goes, so I'll be excited to pick this one up because I really loved Beartown, loved the story, loved the writing, loved the characters, and I think it's a book that's going to stick with me for quite a long time. And I've heard that the series just gets better as you read on, so I do want to continue on the series. If you haven't heard of this series, it follows, as I say, a small town in Sweden, quite desolate. The town is kind of worried about its existence because the economy has been failing and more people are leaving this town. They do have a small hockey team who are about to put them back on the map by winning a tournament, and what they hope is that will bring tourists to the area to kind of get the economy working again. And just before the hockey tournament, there is an incident that happens within the town that kind of puts the brakes on that tournament and really splits the town in terms of their feelings about the incident, in terms of their reactions, and the book just really makes you question your own morality, makes you question how you would react in that situation. But it's done in such a masterful way that it's so nuanced, you know, it's not kind of in your face. There's a lot of social commentary around the incident, and yeah, it was just a really beautiful read. Very harrowing at times, but it did also have me giggling and laughing in parts as well. So really excited to continue with that series and to see where the story goes. And the other book I have by Frederick Bachman on my TBR is A Man Called Ove, and this is actually going to be my kind of in real life book club pick for March, so I do need to read this. But I do also think it's probably a good read for spring. So it's quite a short book, this one, and I believe we're following an old man who basically has lost the joy in life. He's pretty grumpy, you know, he doesn't really understand the younger generation, iPads, iPhones, social media, all that type of stuff. And I think we're just following him along on his journey to maybe find happiness again. And that's all I really know about this one. I want to kind of go into it a little bit blind and just go on the journey with him. But if the writing is anything like Town, then I think this is one that I'm really going to enjoy. So because it's my book club pick, I will be reading it in spring, but I do think this is also a really good book to read around this time. Next up, I've got Watermoon by Samantha Soto Yambayo, and I think this one is set in almost like a magical pawn shop. So for most people, they will see a ramen shop when they're outside, but for certain people, they will see a pawn shop where they can go in and kind of trade in their regrets, their memories, and exchange them if they wish to. And one day, the owner of the pawn shop basically wakes up to find that it has been ransacked and the most important acquisition within there has been stolen, and also her father is missing. In comes this handsome, charming customer who she's never met before, but they end up kind of allying to try and find her father and to get back what was stolen from the pawn shop. And I believe the story goes from there. I believe it goes into a bit of an alternate universe, but I just heard it's really cozy, really whimsical, and as with most of the recommendations, that does seem to be a bit of a theme for spring. So I think this would be the perfect season to pick this one up, and I've just been really intrigued by it since I heard it was coming out, so definitely want to read this over the next few months. And then last up for books I have on my physical TBR, I've got The Sirens by Amelia Hart. Now, this is the same author as Wayward, which I absolutely loved. I read it last year or maybe the year before. Absolutely loved it. Definitely a bit more literary fiction with a bit of magical realism in there. And in this one, we're following Lucy, who is kind of running away from something that she's done and from things that have been done to her. And she knows the only person who's going to understand is her sister Jess. But when she goes to try and find Jess, she finds out that Jess has been missing for quite some time. No one knows where she is. So Lucy kind of embarks on this journey to try and find her sister. Within this one, there is kind of an undercurrent of some folklore within the local town about these sirens who lived, you know, hundreds of years ago, that there were men disappearing and men have started to disappear within this town. And I think there's going to be a bit of a link between obviously the sisters and that folklore, just going off some of this author's previous works. So interested to see where this one goes. I do think there's going to be a bit more of a mystery around this one than there was in her other works. So definitely intrigued to see how this differs. But again, another one, as soon as I heard about it and as soon as I read the synopsis, it's one that I've been really intrigued by and cannot wait to read. So next up, I'll move on to some of the new releases that I want to pick up over the next few months, or at least I'm very interested in picking up. And the first one is Oathbound by Tracy Deonn. Now, I believe this is already out in the US, but in the UK and in Ireland, we don't get this until next week on the 13th. So I do have to patiently wait for that. But basically, this is the third book in the Legendborn series, and this series is kind of embroiled in Arthurian legend, and there's quite a lot of kind of black history and things like that embroiled in there as well, and different folklores interwoven into the narrative. Really different than anything I've read before, and definitely an underrated series, I would say. And in this one, in the first book, we follow Bree, whose mother has just passed away. She ends up going to college and joining almost like this secret society, and ends up discovering, as I say, this kind of Arthurian legend and the link between that society and that. And the story kind of goes from there. Really love the writing in this, really love the characters. There's definitely been great pacing in there. There's a tiny bit of a love triangle in it, but it's not the annoying kind. I've really enjoyed it anyway. And we've been waiting quite some time for this third book, so I'm really excited to read this one and to see where the story goes, especially with the cliffhanger after the second book. So this is definitely one of my most highly anticipated books of this year. Then we've got Wildside by Elsie Silver. So this has just come out, and I've read the first two books within this Rose Hill series, so Wild Love and Wild Eyes. Did enjoy them. They were kind of, you know, 3.5 to 4 star for me. They weren't kind of 5 star or anything, but I did really enjoy them, and the characters that we're going to be following within this book, I'm really intrigued by, especially with the crumbs that we've got in the first two books, because definitely seems like they're just going to absolutely hate each other. A lot of these stories are, I believe, kind of single dad trope, so interested to see how that fits in here, interested to see how the characters end up becoming a couple. I think the theme with this one's kind of going to be almost like an enemies to lovers as much as it can be within a contemporary romance, and a bit of fake dating almost. So definitely intrigued to read that one. Hopefully going to read it soon so that I can get up to date in that series as well. And then the next one is Our Infinite Fates by Laura Stevens. one. Again, I do think this one's out now. But basically the premise of this one is, I've heard it kind of pitched as, if you love Daddy LaRue, you're going to love this one. It's basically following these two people who have lived 1,000 lives, and in each one of them has ended up killing the other, but they do also fall in love in each life as well. So really interested to see how that one plays out. I'm an absolutely huge fan of Daddy LaRue. So if the comparison is true and it does kind of replicate that, you know, it kind of has that eternal life theme going for it. So be really interested to see how that compares, but I won't kind of compare. I think it's a pretty big claim to say that it's like Daddy LaRue, so I will kind of take it as it comes, but definitely really intrigued about that one. And then we've got The Shadow Bride by Shelby Mahorn, which is the second book in the Scarlet Veil series, and I think this is just a duology, so it is the end of that series. And this is also a spin-off from the Serpent and Dove series. So Serpent and Dove is kind of witch hunter, bit of a relationship between them. 3 books in that series. I really loved that series as well. So if you haven't read that, definitely check that out, but I would say that's more of a autumn read, and this one is as well, but it's coming out and I really love the first book, so I do want to pick it up as soon as it comes out. But the Scarlet Veil and this book are kind of following more of a vampire lore, and I really love the first book. As I say, I can't really give too many details because it's kind of spoilers for Serpent and Dove as well to give even the Scarlet Veil's synopsis, but all you need to know is it's romantasy, it has vampires, it has a lot of lore in there, enemies to lovers. If you like anything kind of within that realm, I think you'll really enjoy this series, so definitely pick it up if you haven't yet, but maybe wait until autumn if you haven't picked it up yet. Then we have Gifted and Talented by Olivia Blake. Olivia Blake is one of my absolute favourite authors, so really intrigued to read this. I'm not sure if there's going to be a bit of magical realism in here or anything, but I do have the arc for this one, so hopefully I'll be able to start it soon. But it comes out in April, and all I've heard about this one is it's kind of a rich family with rich family drama, and that's all I know. I've heard that it can be compared to Succession. I've never watched that show, so I'm not sure how true that is, but if you've watched that show and you enjoyed it, maybe you'll enjoy this book too. But I basically trust whatever Olivia Blake brings out, I'm going to read it and I'm going to love it, so really excited to read that one. And then lastly, I've got The Night and the Moth by Rachel Gillig. So Rachel Gillig wrote One Dark Window, and I absolutely loved that. Very gothic. I believe it was new adult, and I just really loved the kind of the vibes of that duology, and I believe this one's going to be gothic as well. So described as a gothic mist-cloaked tale of a young prophetess forced on an impossible quest with the one knight whose future is beyond her sight. So again, I just really loved Rachel Gillig's writing. I really loved her prose and really loved the story as well within the One Dark Window duology. So if this series is anything like that, I think it's one that I'll definitely enjoy. So that's it, that's everything. As I say, it's not an exhaustive list or anything, just a few books that I think would be good to read in this season, and then a bit of a list of books that I want to try and get to. I am very much mood reading at the moment. I am picking TBRs, but for the most part I'm just going with what I want to read so that I don't get into a slump. But out of my physical TBR, I think those 4 books are definitely the ones that I want to get to within the next couple of months. Let me know your spring reading recommendations and any books you think I should be checking out in the spring season, especially if you've kind of watched some of my videos and you've seen books that I have in my TBR. If there's anything you think I should be picking up over the next few months, definitely let me know, and let me know what you're wanting to read this spring season and what your priority is going to be over the next few months. If you like this video, do remember to give it a like, and if you want to see more from me, remember to subscribe. I post 2 videos per week, and it's videos like this, so recommendation videos, TBR jars, book shopping, reading vlogs, all good bookish things like that. Other than that, thanks so much for watching this one. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you in the next one soon. Bye!